I'm Mark Settle, and I'm really pleased today to be joined by Joanne Peca. Joanne has the unique distinction of being an IT practitioner. She has functioned as a CIO in the past, and she's also an educator. She's actually tried to educate college students, and I say tried to because I think many professionals are still learning quite a bit about their craft in an academic environment. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Joanne. I'm just going to reflect a bit on my own personal experience. I've done a lot of college recruiting in the past and actually gone on campus, for some of the job fairs and things of that nature, and have been astonished at how little insight college students have into what really happens in an IT organization. I think about their perception of IT is writing code and testing. And other than those two activities, again, just to get us started on this conversation, I remember talking to one student and he and his professor had developed some kind of an application. I said, well, who's supporting this? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, if somebody using this complains or needs help, who responds to that person? And he looked at me quizzically for about 30 seconds and he said, I guess it's the professor. I have no idea what happens if things go wrong. So anyway, now that I've indulged myself, why don't you get us started by talking a little bit about your background?
Sure. So as you said, I'm at Penn State University in our College of IS&T at the University Park campus. I have been full-time as a faculty member for a little over 2 years now. But prior to that, I had been CIO for Penn State Altoona, which is one of the largest campuses in the Penn State ecosystem. And I had been there for about a decade, from starting in 2010 and wrapping up near the end of 2019 as I moved into my faculty role. And as to your point, what I try to bring to the table is this idea of bringing not only, the theory, but also the true practice of working in IT and InfoSec. And so, in the College of IS&T, we have about 2,000 students on campus and another 1,500 in our world campus environment. So these are students who can be anywhere in the world and, being engaged with Penn State faculty. And in many cases, the same faculty who are teaching on campus. So it's a really nice way for, a student who is sort of coming from a non-traditional background to have an opportunity to work with our faculty. And so, yeah, what I've tried to do, though, over the years is talk to my students about my own background and my path and explain to them that IT does not exist in a bubble. That's I think the main thing. And you already gave that great example of who's supporting it. Who are your end users? How are they using the system or the service? These are all things that I try to bring to the table, and I try to bring some real world examples. And I might steal yours because it's a really good one of, the basics. Who's supporting, once this thing gets unleashed out into the wild, who is supporting it? Who is making sure it's functioning as expected? So the little details, right?
What would you say are some of the more common misconceptions that maybe a student has about what a career in IT would be like?
So I think, a lot of the times, to your point, it's this idea that, if I'm going to work in information technology or information security, it's all about the technology. And so what I try to do is really stress the business side and the connection to the business. So whatever you're doing, whether you're working for a government agency or you're working for a consulting company or you go and work for a small startup, in all cases, you need to have this connection and build relationships with the business side of the house. And, for that reason, I think, that's what I spend a lot of time on. Our courses are structured in a way where we do make sure that we're getting that technology piece. And, things that I've tried to do over the years is, bring in guest speakers, people who are actually doing the work and talking about their experiences. And I honestly don't prep them at all. And I would say about 90% of the time they hit every point that I'm just like, I hope they talk about this. And they do, because it is really about those relationships and understanding what people are trying to accomplish and then supporting that. That's the role of IT.
That certainly wouldn't be true for an entry-level job in IT. But I tell people, as you take on more senior managerial and executive roles, you become less and less of a technologist, and you become actually an industrial psychologist. You try to go and get to your point, your business partners to really explain the problem they're trying to solve. All too often, in their own mind, they already have come up with a solution, and they just kind of want you to run off and do what it is that they've preconceived notion that they've or conclusion that they've come to. And then even when you can find that, those ideas require usually a tremendous amount of socialization, directly proportional to the size of the initiative. So many functions have dependencies on other functions, upstream, downstream. If somebody in marketing wants to charge off and get a blockchain application to go figure out some marketing lead framework, probably the legal guys have got to take a look at that. The sales guys have got to figure out how to work those kind of leads. Maybe they want to do some marketing specifically to subgroups, et cetera, all that kind of business related stuff. That and that's the other thing that can happen too is the business people can be fairly naive, and then they'll come back to IT and say, "Why did you ever tell me that it wasn't able to do that?" Or that
yes, it can be a conversation, right? It can, so that's the other thing I talk about. And in fact, my doctorate is in organizational leadership. So I have a master's in information systems, and I did all of that along the way. But when it came to what do I want to spend, a number of years on and do research in the area, my thought was organizational leadership is really that piece. At that point, I was actually starting, I don't know what possessed me to do this. I was starting my doctorate at the same time I was starting as a CIO. So that was, a great year. But, it was really, when I was making that decision, it was what is going to get me that step further, right? And that's what I talk to my students about too, is, if you want to be a technologist your entire career and at maybe 21, 22, that's what you kind of expect is I want to go in, I want a red team, I want a blue team, I want to do, these really specific things. But over time, a lot of the time, for better or for worse, if you want to move up in an organization, it's usually through managerial roles or supervisory roles. And so, having these people skills, I hate having them called soft skills, because there truly is science behind things like organizational leadership. You hit the nail on the head. Industrial organizational psychology. These are all pieces of the IT experience, the IT career. And so, really trying to communicate that to my students is a big part of what I try to bring to the table.
So when students come back from internships, summer internships, or now they've been out in the quote unquote real world, and they, first of all, they realize what you were telling them is true, or at least partially true, they can relate to that now. What kind of observations do they have? And do they come back kind of more charged up, feeling like, wow, now I get the connection of IT to the business to produce business results? Or are they like aghast that, oh my God, they waste all their time doing these non-technology things? That's not what I want to do at all.
Well, I think, I see sort of two camps. It depends on, did they have an internship where they were really happy with the work they were doing, or did they think they wanted to do something, based on, just people sort of maybe informing them about, oh, this is a great job path. Well, maybe it is for them, but, maybe not for this particular human being. So I think, depending on what they've experienced, some students come back with the, I teach a lot of our juniors and seniors. And so they've already done some internships and they come back. And when I'm talking about things like communication, and I have a writing course for that instance, and I talk about, you're going to write more than you think in your IT or InfoSec career. You're going to, have to communicate concisely, whether it's, PowerPoint presentations or a memo. You're going to have to write up reports and make people understand, different audiences understand what you're talking about. And so one of the things I do here, and I love getting this feedback and sort of support from the students when I'm teaching these upper level courses, is they'll sort of in these days, it's comments in Zoom or, in class, they talk about, oh yes, in my internship, I did have to write up a report and so what you're, and basically just confirming like what I'm saying, which is, it's kind of funny, but the students are like, she knows what she's talking about. Like we should all listen right now. But the other thing I hear from students is, they go out and if maybe they thought they wanted to work for the government based on, again, it could be media, it could be movies, it could be whatever, and I'm not picking on the government. I'm just sort of choosing one of many industries, but they may come back and say, you know what, I thought I wanted to work for a 3-letter agency and now I'm going to do a complete pivot. And so that's the other thing. I do work with students. In addition to being a faculty member, I'm also the coordinator for our cybersecurity program. So I get an opportunity to work with our students who maybe want to adjust sort of what their focus is. We have things called application focuses where, do I want to do geopolitics, or now do I want to, pivot? I've had some students come back and say, I want to do communication as my application focus because I see these connections. I've had students come back with saying, I want to do psychology as my application focus because I'm seeing what you're talking about now. And having these different types of skills along with my technical skills really makes sense. So I think the internship piece is really important in any educational process, because to your point, they get out and have an opportunity to see what it really will be like. And they sort of dip their toes in. And if they don't like it, they can back out very easily and say, I'm going to pivot while the stakes are relatively low, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly right. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit. You're well aware that concerns about diversity and inclusion within our profession, have probably never been higher. I'm engaged in a number of different CIO groups, and probably at least a monthly or maybe bi-weekly basis, there are webinars and things where people get together and they talk about different initiatives and innovative ideas they have to try to source and recruit, people from kind of non-conventional talent pools that are out there. So it occurred to me, the community that you're immersed in, the students, they're at the receiving end of all these kind of well-intentioned new initiatives. And I'm curious if you've seen anything, that is different than the way recruiting was done before, or does seem to be innovative.
So one thing I have seen is, actually there's two things. The first is, back when we were on campus and I would, sort of walk through our main classroom building and see some of those tables set up, information booths about, come and work for consulting group X. The first thing I noticed is there were some groups that I think very specifically decided to try to send a diverse team out to man those tables, right? And so that's the first thing I think about is, if you're staffing your tables with a team that looks like the student population, they're going to be more interested in coming up to your table and just talking to you. It's a very simple thing, but representation really does matter. And so that's one of the first things I noticed, and the first pieces of advice I can give is make sure that that team represents the people that you want to recruit and bring to your team. The second thing is, and I've seen this especially now that we've shifted to more online delivery, is, there's all sorts of diversity. We want more women in technology. We want to support the BIPOC population. We want LGBTQIA folks to feel included and welcome in our communities. And what too often I think is done is we put the onus on those groups. Hey, women, start a women in tech organization. Hey, and then whatever intersectionality we can think of, across all of those, the work becomes part of the work that we need to do just to succeed in our jobs. And so one of the things I've seen, and I'll loop this back to recruiting, is there are groups that are basically, they're trying to recruit people and saying, we've already done some of this work for you. We have these different affiliation groups within our organizations, and the work is not going to be put on your shoulders, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have is we're telling, I'll use the group of women. We want more women in STEM. And I've seen this myself in that, then it's, well, hey, would you like to lead our women in technology team? Great. Where do I fit this into the rest of my job responsibilities? Or if I want to go to a tech conference that's focused on women, does that take away from the pool of funding and time that I have to do some technical training? And so I think these are the things that we need to think about, and the things I try to think about as a CIO. And when I see recruiters trying to reach out to these groups proactively, demonstrating again that the work will not be put on your shoulders. We're going to give you some resources to support you. And doing that proactively, again, I think is really important. So even things like, we didn't mention first generation students, but, how do you go into an interview? What is that process? What does a case study interview look like, or a technical interview look like? There are a lot of students who don't have, parents or family members who can coach them through that process because maybe they've never done that before. So there's so many things that I think can be done. But again, I think the key things are just demonstrating that your team is made up of a diverse group, and again, demonstrating that by sending those folks to the campuses. And then again, in the world of online, there's just so many resources you can give to help again reach out to these different affiliations and say, we're here to support you, and we want you to be part of this team, and we recognize that you are bringing some talent that we may not have otherwise been able to reach or identify unless we help you do that. So I think those are really the big things that organizations can do to help diversify their talent pool.
I'll tell you an interesting story. That was a couple of years ago. It relates to Workday. So Workday was out. I was talking to the CIO there, and they had a hackathon at Workday, and what they came up with was this procedure where at the job fair, students walk up typically, I don't know if this still happens, but they would give you like a paper copy of their resume. They come in with a file folder, they leave it there on the desk, and so if you have a small team, you're kind of screening people. And what they were doing was in real time, they were taking pictures of the resumes, the paper resumes, sending them back to like the Workday campus, which is right here in the Bay Area. And then if the person was somebody who looked very desirable to Workday, they would look for connections, like people that were from their hometown or that were had graduated from that university. And like before dinner that day, they'd reach out to that person, like you've got a friend at Workday,
Yeah.
And that it's just so much about human relationships, just that little. Of course, if nobody else is doing that, the significance that that takes on is kind of huge. But anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we're going to wrap up, and I just can't help resist one last question. I had a friend at Stanford who was teaching at Stanford several years ago, and at the time he said we laugh about it on the faculty, but like if we put the term machine learning into any course title, it's good for 600 or 800 people signing up, And I know that in an academic world, to some degree, you're kind of rated on, class size and, the number of your teaching, executing the teaching responsibilities. So in the world that you inhabit today, are there one or two terms like that that just galvanize attention?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say blockchain and artificial intelligence. There you go. Like if you put that into your course title, you are good to go for a full course with your students. And that's one of the things we try to do too, though, is we need to keep our courses fresh. And so we do something at Penn State where we offer special topic courses, where something cutting edge, new technology, or just even again speaking of that sort of business technology connection. If there's something where there can be an application, for example, of blockchain. But yeah, if you put either of those two terms in a course title, you will get students knocking down the door to get into the course. Absolutely.
Well, they're onto something, because here in Silicon Valley, we say, like, if you can rename your company, Mark Enterprises .ai, the valuation goes up by a factor or two. So
absolutely.
Maybe yes. I have no idea what it does, but just
but it's using artificial intelligence, so it must be good.
Okay, this has been delightful. I really appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure our audience is going to enjoy this conversation. And thanks so much. And best of luck.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.